All right, folks, and welcome back to Fic Night. We've had a finale for a couple of months for a hiatus, for a couple of months while our site enjoyed the House Cup finale events. We are here jumping right back into it with another Fic Night, which I'm excited to do. Just to let everybody know, we're using kind of a different method tonight. That method is not why it's just me. I'll get into that in a second. But that's why we're late, just trying to tweak and adapt on the fly to a change on the back end of how we run Fic Night through YouTube. It used to be through quick hangouts. Now we're having to use a different function. But here we are, and I am excited to feature another story from one of our members. As anybody who's been here before knows, I am Kevin, aka Title Dragon, one of the staff members at HP Fanfic Talk, aka HPFT. Every month, unless we have a House Cup finale hiatus, a holiday hiatus, or something like that, we feature a story selected by our members, written by one of our members. And this month, that story is Nothing to Lose by Roro Weasley. I am just going to, since we're already running a little bit late, I'm going to go ahead and jump into reading the story. And because the author, due to time zone things, has sometimes come up for us, wasn't able to be here with us, I have sent off some questions. I've got some great responses, and I'm going to share those things with you once you've heard the story, because it'll be obviously a little bit better and easier to understand once you've got the background from the fic. So again, this is our featured story from August of 2019. It's Nothing to Lose by Roro Weasley. Next time, we're going to the ballet. The younger woman nudged him lightly with her elbow as they continued along the busy London street. Draco, we went to the ballet last time. You promised we would see a musical this time, and so I chose one. Yes, and you just had to choose the one about vaudevilles murdering their lovers because they want stardom. Astoria shot him a playful glare. It wasn't just about that, you know. Roxy and Velma knew exactly what they wanted and refused to let men dictate otherwise. I thought it was rather empowering. He tugged her close, a smirk plastered on his face. Should I be worried? Because the men had it coming? I don't think you're that bad, Draco, she quipped back. It was an early evening in mid-April. The days were beginning to lengthen, the temperature staying mild and comfortable. And the city sky was a glorious stroke of orange watercolor, visible above the urban jungle. The matinee having just finished, they were now venturing out for dinner. Astoria Greengrass and her fiancé, Draco Malfoy, were due to be married in 5 weeks, contrary to their parents' wishes. You'd think their pureblood statuses would have ended the argument right there. Not that that even factored into the young couple's decision. While Lucius and Narcissa despised Astoria for her tolerance and defense of Muggle-borns and Muggles, Orpheus and Freya Greengrass saw the Malfoys as traitors. To them, it was a lose-lose marriage. Even Daphne didn't support them, but for an entirely different reason. 5 years after the end of the Second Wizarding War, the defeat of Voldemort, and Daphne was currently dating, and no doubt would shortly be marrying, a half-blood by the name of Lee Jordan, former Gryffindor Quidditch commentator, host of the pirate radio program Potter Watch, and member of Dumbledore's army. Lee was basically the antithesis of everything their family stood for. If Astoria was looked down upon by their parents for going ahead with the marriage to Draco, then by Merlin was Daphne lucky she hadn't yet been disowned, like Draco's Aunt Andromeda, whose orphaned grandson had recently turned 5. Then again, Daphne had always been their parents' favorite. Astoria had basically been an accident. Her older sister actually chastised her for marrying a pureblood, which was ridiculous in 2 ways. One, Astoria had actually fallen in love with Draco, and it was clearly the furthest thing from an arranged marriage. Two, both Greengrass sisters quite plainly held the same tolerant attitude to life, and should, therefore, be allies. Astoria was almost jealous of Draco for being an only child. Children. That sent an uncomfortable jolt through her body. She had to discuss this with Draco. She'd meant to as soon as they got engaged, but nerves had gotten the better of her. That and being swept up in the sheer joy of knowing just how much she meant to her love. As they entered the restaurant, a small French affair along Charing Cross Road, they were shown to their usual table by Stefan, who greeted them enthusiastically as ever. The couple frequented the restaurant so often, Astoria knew all of the staff by their names. Stefan was about Draco's height, but only 19 years old. Originally from southern France, and a student at one of the local Muggle universities, he worked most evenings and double shifts at weekends to support himself. Coming from a wealthy family where she'd never had to want for anything, and being a mere 2 years older than him, Astoria made sure to always tip him generously. Stefan was such a bright soul, an innocent Muggle kid oblivious to the second Wizarding War that had ended when he'd been 14. If have been at Hogwarts during that time, he would certainly be different now. Less spirited, less youthful. Like her. Like Draco. As the evening continued, Stefan, 2 other waitresses, Olivia, a 24-year-old auburn-haired hopeful actress, and Prim, a black British 29-year-old mother of 3, had them well looked after. As they provided their orders of food and drink, Astoria engaged them in conversation, catching up on their Muggle lives. Draco was watching her with a mixture of teasing, exasperation, fondness, and something else that probably meant he knew something was on her mind. But she continued to revel in the distraction. Muggle relations were important to the rebuilding process. Draco gave her until halfway through their main course. Stefan, Olivia, and Prim had to serve other customers, and so had left the 2 to enjoy their date. He put down his fork and reached over the table to take her hand and squeeze it gently. "Tell me," he proffered. There was no demand in it, only love and concern, and it sent a wave of gratitude sweeping through her. How had she gotten so lucky as to be marrying a man who cared so deeply for her? Astoria took a sip of champagne like it was liquid luck. It wasn't that she was afraid of her soon-to-be husband's reaction exactly. She was just terrified of admitting the thing out loud because then it was real. But she still had to give him the choice. Once they were married, they would be living together. He deserved the chance to back out. She put down her glass and took a steadying breath. I don't even know where to begin, only that I've been keeping something from you. Something that will affect our marriage together and the rest of my life. Draco didn't say anything, but the worry in his eyes increased tenfold, and he raised her hand up to his lips and kissed it, just like he did the first time they met. It gave her the courage to keep going, though her voice was shaking. It started at school around my 17th birthday, aches in my limbs and fatigue. At first, I thought it was pressure from newts and projects, and so I never bothered going to the hospital. But it continued. Even in the summer holidays, the ache spread. I got migraines. Some days I could barely walk up the stairs without needing to rest. Father essentially told me to man up in not so pleasant words, but Mother took pity on me and whisked me away to St. Mungo's. I had tests all through my 7th year because no one could work out what was wrong, only that it definitely wasn't academic related. All they could do was just give me potions to manage the pain. Then someone properly looked, at our family tree and archived records within the ministry. Every 7 generations since the 17th century, these same systems have popped up in the Greengrass family. She looked at him, staring him straight in the eye, her own vision clouded with tears. I'm cursed, Draco, with a blood malediction, and I'm not going to get old. I could be dead before we're 30. He was silent for a minute, and Astoria let him have the time to process what she'd said. He didn't take too long before coming out with, "You're having second thoughts about the wedding. You don't want to go ahead with it." She couldn't help but chuckle fondly as she shook her head. "Draco, I would marry you even if I was going to die within the month, because I love you with everything I have. My only doubts are that you won't wish to marry me." His shoulders slumped and he looked down at the table. "You think I don't love you enough?" "Not at all, but think about it, Draco. I will most likely not be able to work, won't be able to give you an heir." Her voice broke and the tears finally started to fall. She grabbed the clean napkin from her lap and used it as a tissue. "I have to give you the choice to back out of this before we're in too deep, if we aren't already. You don't think you deserve to be loved for this? Astoria," he sighed, waving Stefan over, presumably for the bill. "I love you for you. Marriage is precious and relies on both parties looking out for each other, bearing one another's burdens, for better, for worse, in sickness and in health. I'm not bothered about an heir. The Malfoy family have done so much damage to this world. I'd rather it die out with me. If we were to ever have children, it would be for us, because we want to, not to uphold some family tradition." With a meal paid for, including tips, Draco helped her back into her coat, before embracing her firmly and planting a kiss on her head. Astoria instantly wanted more. Turning her head up to face his and snaking a hand around his neck, she pulled him to her, kissing him with all the emotion she could muster. Stefan and Prim were clapping, and she blushed furiously. They waved their goodbyes and headed back out into the London bustle towards their apparition point. Draco clasped her hand, providing a sense of comfort for both of them. Entering the alley which served as their designated safe travel spot, the youngest Malfoy walked a little way in before leaning against the wall. Instinctively, Astoria moved closer and he accepted her, wrapping his arms protectively around her waist. She breathed in his scent, and it calmed her as they stood there, relishing in the peace of the moment. Draco was stroking her hair now. "Come home with me tonight. I want to know everything. Don't shut me out." She could only nod in response, not trusting her voice. In all honesty, she felt drained, a combination of finally getting over the elephant in the room and her potions beginning to wear off, meaning she was due another dose. She always carried enough in her bag in case of emergency. Then his warm hands were cupping her face, his stormy gray eyes boring into her soft chocolate ones. She loved him so much, with every ounce of her being, and she knew he did too. "Nothing thus far has dissuaded me from wanting to marry you. You saved me, Astoria, from myself, from my family, from falling back into my old ways. You're the most amazing woman. You're compassionate, you're kind, to everyone and everything. I don't deserve you. I love you and nothing else, no matter how bad it could get, will dissuade me from making you my wife. If we have a limited time together, even more reason to get married now. I will do whatever is in my willpower to support you. We'll figure out these circumstances together because I love you, Astoria. Whether we have a month, a year, or 10, I want to spend it with you. Astoria was crying again, this time from pure happiness, and she threw her arms around him again, hugging him tightly before crashing her mouth against his. She'd known in her heart that he wouldn't leave her to suffer alone. Of course she'd known. But that never stopped the sheer anxiety of having to deal with the conversation and all of the what ifs. She wouldn't have been able to live with herself if she hadn't given Draco a way out, a clear path he could take to make his own way in the world. She'd finally had the courage to offer him that, and he had boldly proclaimed his love, had bared his soul to her. He was so damn brave to even be with her in the first place, to find Lucius Malfoy of all people. Just like that, all possible doubts disappeared. They needed each other. They were yin and yang, two chaotic energies colliding sweetly together to be joined and united until death. They had nothing to lose. Despite the Malfoys and the Greengrasses being opposed to the match of Draco and Astoria, the wedding was nevertheless a glamorous affair befitting the two prestigious families. It was a heavily publicized event, the press drinking in the opportunity for another story on the Malfoys, and the guest list was vast. Despite the obvious dramatized nature of the entire arrangement, the young woman wasn't about to let that distract her. It was her and Draco's day. Everyone else be damned. As they said their vows to each other, Astoria began to weep. Draco's eyes were locked on hers as he promised to stay by her side through whatever was to come. They were really doing this. Draco was really doing this. His love for her ran so deep that he was willing to be her lifelong companion, willing to bear the burden of her blood malediction and all that came with it. Swaying together in the ballroom a short while later, Astoria had never felt so energized. Her head lay against her husband's chest, his arms around her waist. It was absolutely perfect. I'm so happy we did this, she said, sighing contentedly. Yeah. She lifted her head up to look at him. You're magnificent, Draco. I'm so thankful to have you for the rest of my life. I love you so much, he whispered, before lifting her chin and kissing her sweetly. Astoria pushed herself closer, deepening their connection. She felt him smile against her lips and withdrew to lean her forehead against his, her hands cupping his face, expressing adoration through touch. The room around them vanished. The only thing that existed in that moment was just the two of them. I love you too, she grinned, stealing another kiss. This time Draco responded with more passion, gently biting her lower lip, and she barely suppressed a moan. He broke the kiss to stroke a hand through her hair. Onwards. She chewed her lip before nodding. Onwards. So, as I was saying earlier, we were not able to have the author, Roro Weasley of Nothing Left to Lose, with us tonight because of time zone issues. But I have her answers to some questions that I sent out. Hopefully, these will be questions that each of you also had about the story, or at least would be interested in the answers to. And so without further ado, I'm going to jump into those. The first question I had was, obviously the story was written for a challenge. And if I didn't mention that earlier, it was written for a challenge that was set by user Build Your Walls over on Tumblr. That challenge being the basis for the fic, I asked, when you got the prompt, what were your feelings? Straight off the bat, she told us she wanted to write it and had ideas floating around in her head. It would be a little angsty, but with a happy ending, which is what I tend to write anyway. Writing Storia was going to be difficult because my go-to pairing is, of course, Scorbus, Albus Potter, and Scorpius Malfoy. But I was very excited to explore them more. I also hate deadlines, but somehow I managed to actually meet this one. What's a challenge without being pushed out of your comfort zone? As a follow-up to that, I asked, you have one other story on your author page where a story is listed as a major character. Does she appeal to you individually or more in the broader context of the next-gen version of the Malfoy family? Minor spoiler warning for Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. I would say both. In the play, she never appears on stage, only spoken about by other characters. But in the play, Astoria dies right before Scorpius's third year at Hogwarts, which, to bring the tone down a wee bit, is actually canonically this very week. Scorpius is 13 years old and Astoria is 36, 37. We know very little about her other than Draco deeply loved her and she specifically wanted Scorpius to be brought up without the pureblood ideals that she and Draco grew up with. In this piece, I wanted to ensure I explored her individually and made her into her own person, rather than just a name thrown out a few times in Cursed Child. She heavily influences Scorpius, his personality, his values, and you all know how important that little Malfoy is to me. I asked, would you consider writing another Astoria Draco story where their pairing is at the epicenter? Funny you should say that. I'm currently writing another one. It focuses on her relationship with Draco and Scorpius over the years, the deterioration of her condition, and eventually her death, all told from the point of view of their house elf, Busy, which sounds incredibly interesting. And hopefully we'll be able to check that out soon on the HPFT archive. But I followed up again with the prompt, which is the challenge I was referring to earlier from Build Your Walls on Tumblr. The prompt doesn't seem to require Astoria keeping her condition a secret. So why choose that path? I think I just inferred that and just went with it, to be honest. Plus, I think it is more emotionally impacting for Astoria to have that secret and risk losing her marriage by giving Draco the freedom to leave. She was always going to tell him about the curse. It's incredibly important to know that she's never conflicted about her own choice, telling him and losing the marriage or hiding it and confessing after marriage. She knew exactly what she was doing. It shows her compassion and love for Draco. She's been able to get away with it, so to speak, up until now because they're not living together and won't be until they're married. But she would definitely not be able to keep it a secret once they were constantly in each other's presence. Draco, I said, is remarkably okay, in my opinion, with getting this news as late as he did. I know I would have been extremely upset. Not necessarily break it off upset, but I don't even know how I'd react. How is he so okay with this without missing a beat? I most definitely see where this question has come from, but I will say just remember this is Draco 5 years after Deathly Hallows. He and Astoria have been together probably 2 years at most, and Scorpius will not be born for another 3 years. I strongly believe that Draco at this age, 23, will absolutely still be struggling to come to terms with everything he experienced at school. He did some horrific things and equally experienced some horrific things. Astoria is his light in the darkness. He loves her, and that is massive for him. And he's allowing himself this brand new thing to love and be loved, to have a second chance. Also, because it's Astoria's point of view, we of course don't get much of an insight into Draco's head. He will no doubt have all sorts of conflicting and dark thoughts running through his mind, but Astoria allows him to push through those, to have some clarity, and to be in control of his future. The second question was, what was the reasoning behind your structure for the story? I'm honestly not sure how to answer this one. I'm a pantser, and so I don't plan my fics other than perhaps basic plot notes. I just tend to write and see how it comes out, and more often than not, I rarely substantially change things in my editing stage. but I know that I wanted to slot some character information in that shows the story as a character, like knowing the muggles in the restaurant and being at odds with her sister. Speaking of Daphne, she is one to have a string of relationships, and Lee is just one of the many. She won't be marrying him, but that is not obvious in the piece, mostly because it's to show how little a story and her sister communicate. I may need to add more to that. My next question was if is Muggle tolerant if is Muggle tolerant greengrass children a headcanon of yours or something to make the prompt work? I sorry I struggled over my own question. That kind of sounds like a mess reading it back. I'm not sure it even makes any grammatical sense anyway. But her answer was that this, if you include Pottermore, some of us do, some of us don't. So that's why I'm posing this part of the answer that way. This is actually canon and can be found on Pottermore. Over the Second Wizarding War, Astoria's perspective shifts away from the ideals she was brought up with into a more tolerant view. She consequently raises Scorpius away from all of that and allows him to be a child and to express himself how he likes, and to respect everyone no matter their background. I do headcanon, though, that she stayed and fought in the Battle of Hogwarts. Daphne is most certainly headcanon. I just like the idea of both sisters having similar values but different executions. Daphne despises Draco for everything he did, and he's a pureblood. Daphne won't marry a pureblood or have relationships with purebloods. Of that, I am sure. Was that informed based on how you write Scorpius or independently? And she said it was absolutely based on Scorpius along with the canon information. In Cursed Child, Scorpius is this adorable, precious, anxious bookworm, constantly referred to as a cinnamon roll within the fandom, and absolutely the polar opposite of his father at that age. He was raised by two loving parents, but is absolutely not entitled or egotistic. He's empathetic, full of love, and embodies his mother in personality and his father in looks. I think Scorpius as a character tells us a lot about Astoria. You just have to look between the lines. Jumping sort of off the story and into Rara Weasley's tendency to write Albus and Scorpius stories, that being her OTP, it seems. I asked her what appeals most to her about the Albus Scorpius pairing. And her answer was the fact that they're each other's lifeline. They're heavily codependent, but it's far from unhealthy. Their friendship is built on them both being essentially outcasts. Scorpius is bullied and accused of being the son of Voldemort. Albus is very much like Harry, but Harry struggles to see the leaves for the wood with Albus, if that makes sense. And at Hogwarts, he's bullied for his lacking magical ability and for just not living up to the Potter name. These two friends find solace in each other. Where Scorpius panics, Albus is calm. Where Albus struggles with expressing himself to his family, Scorpius is someone who wears his heart on his sleeve. They complement each other. Plus, there's some powerful scenes in Cursed Child that heavily allude to more than friendship between them, and certainly potential for them to be a future pairing. Plus, they're just so much fun to write. So much fluff. Finally, one of the strengths I noticed in this story in particular was her ability to weave in who these characters were and the background about them logically into the story rather than all at once, which we've all read stories, whether published or otherwise, that kind of do a background knowledge dump before jumping us into the story or before we really advance the ball with particular characters. But that praise, from my part, is sort of drawn by my perspective on how she wrote the story. And I asked her to give any of us out there who do write any tips. First of all, she said thank you. Thank you for saying thank you. Like she had said before, she said, I'm a pantser. That's my style, which literally means I'm a fly by the seat of my pants writer. I rarely plan my fics in any sort of detail, and I swear most things that get included are more subconscious. I don't know. I've been writing for 8 years now and in several different fandoms, so I think I've just learned it over time. I'm not sure if I can advise someone how to do it, other than to practice. Keep writing and practice and get to know your own writing style. So even though she could not be with us in person, I was really glad to get such detailed answers from Roro Weasley about her story. Um, Due to that sort of tech change I was mentioning earlier, wasn't able to jump in with a preview to sort of see how the setup's working and everything like that. So I don't know if she wants her name put out there. So that's why I'm just sticking with Rower Weasley. However, the fic for this month, as I said, if you're just jumping in, is Nothing to Lose by Roro Weasley. It's posted on our archive at hpfanfictalk.com /archive. And you can also jump into the action by participating as a member of our forums just at hpfanfictalk.com. This is Kevin, aka Titled Dragon, signing off and hoping to see you soon on our forums or posting your stories with us. The link to this story is in the description.